Just the lack of law enforcement in Maine.
No prosecuting attorneys.
So we don't have a U.S. attorney in Maine right now.
What do you mean you don't have a U.S. attorney in Maine?
Governor Janet Mills hasn't uttered a word about the vast criminal conspiracy unfolding in her backyard entirely on her watch, in large part because of a law that she signed.
Probably just a coincidence, right?
I'm sure it's just a coincidence, for sure.
Maine's attorney general, or lack thereof.
Well, just the lack of law enforcement in Maine. I think we've reached a point where
no prosecuting attorneys. Is that what you were saying out there?
Yeah, so we don't have a U.S. attorney in Maine right now.
What do you mean you don't have a U.S. attorney in Maine?
Trump hasn't appointed a U.S. attorney. The Biden U.S. attorney, Darcy McElway, did a few indictments at the federal level of some of the individuals involved in the Chinese drug cartels. Really just the bare minimum. Very politicized office. She wasn't as aggressive as she could have been. She didn't act in the best interests of the state.
We were talking about the governor.
Yes.
Something about the governor.
So Darcy McElway was rewarded by the governor with a judgeship after she retired from the U.S. attorney post, which remains vacant. Trump hopefully is going to be filling that soon. And that U.S. attorney, I'm told, will inherit an org chart that is fairly elaborate that shows Chinese cartel activity in the state of Maine that could be acted on in the same way that Leah Foley in Massachusetts has very rapidly, rolled up some of the Chinese drug cartels there. But it's a mystery for a lot of people why Steve Robinson can go find all of these marijuana sites. I've actually taken multiple congressional candidates. I took CBS News, I've taken all kinds of people to active Chinese marijuana grows, and somehow the state police aren't involved. The governor to this day hasn't said a single word about this. Governor Janet Mills hasn't uttered a word about the vast criminal conspiracy unfolding in her backyard entirely on her watch, in large part because of a law that she signed. And, oh, by the way, at her inauguration in January 2019, was the head of the Chinese consulate in New York, the highest ranking CCP official in the eastern United States.
Well, that's interesting.
Wang Ping or something like that.
Old Wang Ping?
Yeah. So you have that going on, and the state police involved in just 3 of the 70 or 75 different search warrants, very minimal involvement. They won't comment to me. The governor has not commented on this at all. Every legislative attempt to do something to deal with this problem has been shot down. So it's a big mystery. Everybody's wondering, why is this being allowed to continue to happen? And I was actually reviewing physical copies of real estate records related to a Chinese marijuana grow in Corinna, Maine, which is one town over from where I grew up. It's where my mom lives. It's where my grandmother used to go to church. I was looking at these records, and I see at the bottom of one of these real estate transfer documents, the first thing that was unusual to me about the record was that it was a gift transfer of a property in Corinna, Maine, from an individual who lives in Quincy, Massachusetts, to a person who gave an address in Guangdong Province, China. So this is 9 acres in a teardown, basically a hunting camp in central Maine, that is now lawfully owned by an individual who may or may not exist in southeast China, which just so happens to be the area where the legit triad criminal activity is the most intense. It was weird, right? A property transfer. What guy in China has just been thinking, I want 9 acres and a teardown in Corinna, Maine? But what caught my eye was at the bottom of it, there's a line for tax document preparer. And the name there was Paul Mills. And I was like, well, hold on a second, that's the governor's brother. But maybe that's a different Paul Mills. But the address matched. The address was the address for his attorney office. So the governor's brother was the lawyer for a real estate transfer for a known illicit Chinese drug house, where the code enforcement officer in that area is on the record saying this is an illegal Chinese drug house. And he helped transfer it into the custody of a Chinese national living in China. And this came just days after a series of raids by multiple sheriff's departments in the area. So it almost looked like they were trying to protect this property by moving it into the official ownership of somebody who would be beyond the reach of the local police, state police, or even the FBI, because they actually provided an address in China. And further investigation found that Mr. Mills has a number of clients who are involved in the marijuana business in the state of Maine. And the governor won't comment on that. The governor won't say whether she's had any communications or conversations with her brother about it. I had a 10-minute phone call with Paul Mills, and he talked about that property and did say that he was involved in it, and couldn't remember who asked him to be involved in it. Did tell me that he didn't have anyone in his office who speaks Cantonese, which I thought was kind of funny. But it was interesting to me because I had called him just before then, pretending to be someone in Massachusetts who needed a property transfer attorney in that area. And he told me that he doesn't work in that area. So he wouldn't work for me. He wouldn't do a property transfer for me in that part of the state because his office is in a different county. But for the Chinese national and the Chinese woman from Massachusetts who needed to, move around, do a gift transfer for an illicit marijuana grow, he was more than happy to sign on the dotted line.
Probably just a coincidence, right?
I'm sure it's just a coincidence, for sure. But the more I learned about how the real estate world works and how lawyers factor in, the more I began to suspect that there was probably a different, more lucrative money-making opportunity in play here. And it gets back to what we were talking about earlier and what we just grabbed some images of MT Law, the law firm in Massachusetts that was named in the Leah Foley's indictment. MT Law appears to be just your run-of-the-mill law firm. Their entire staff is Chinese, except for their one, American-looking.
One of these doesn't look like the others.
Yeah, just the white gorilla there, who I'm sure attends functions on their behalf. But there's a technique called seasoning the money that I learned about, which may be old hat for people who are familiar with money laundering and how it works. But seasoning the money involves a trusted lawyer, and it's a money laundering technique. It's been used by, white guys going back decades. If you've got a cash heavy business like a coin op laundry or a car wash, and you've got all this cash, but you don't want to pay taxes on it, and you want to make a real estate investment with it, what you do is, instead of trying to bring it to the bank or to a real estate agent to buy property, you bring it to your attorney and you tell your attorney to deposit it in his IOLTA account, or his interest on lawyers. There's different words for it in other accounts, but in other states, but it's an account that lawyers hold money from multiple clients in a single pot, and it earns interest, but it's kind of like protected under statute. So I've got a bag of drug proceeds with $250,000 on it. I bring it to my lawyer. Maybe his name is Mr. Mills. I ask him to deposit it in his trust account. And then the following day, I come in and I say, hey, can you draw a bank check out for $250,000 and make it out to, real estate company X? Real estate company X can't accept a bag full of cash, but they can sure as hell accept that check. And the IRS is never going to know about it. The relationship is protected by attorney-client privilege, and I've just effectively managed to season my money through the attorney's trust account and then pour it back into real estate. And that is a pattern that you can see laid out in the indictment that was filed in the District of Massachusetts, where they show each of the steps that would be necessary to season the money and then dump it back into real estate. And it helps explain how in New England, the real estate empire necessary to facilitate the Chinese drug cartel was able to expand so rapidly, because they were able to take the huge amounts of cash that they were generating from these activities and just dump it back into real estate. And they were buying up properties in Maine 20% over asking price for cash and closing in 20 days. It was the dream for some elderly couple in Maine looking to, move to Florida or something in the middle of the pandemic. So it's part, I think, of the answer to the question, why hasn't anything been done? But also, how did it happen? What are they doing with the money? What are the roles of attorneys in all of this? And I think that if the kind of work that Leah Foley did, or at least the indictment that she was willing to file in Massachusetts, if we were able to see that happen in Maine, it would go a long ways toward dealing with the problem. But we don't have a U.S. attorney in Maine. And that is in part because Trump hasn't appointed one yet, but there's also a tradition called the blue slip tradition, where home state senators get what amounts to a veto of Senate confirmable nominees. So if the president nominates a U.S. attorney from the state of Maine, Senator Angus King, who's a dope and a dummy, and I don't like him at all, if he objects to that individual, he can withhold his blue slip and delay it, cause hearings, controversial votes. He can gum up the works. But if there's a nominee put forward that Senator Angus King and Senator Susan Collins both approve of, then they're not going to cause problems on the blue slip front. So there's these complex negotiations happening between the senators from the state and the Trump administration. And Susan Collins, I think, is a big part of that as well, because she's now the chair of the Appropriations Committee. She's like the third or fourth most powerful person in Washington, D.C. So that adds a layer of complexity to it. So there's complicated reasons why we don't have a U.S. attorney yet. But when we do, I think you're going to see some pretty rapid action rolling up some of these operations. And hopefully they aim for the higher levels and go for the money, the people who are driving Porsches, not the people who are suffering in what I would consider, modern day slavery.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And I should say, Senator Collins deserves a lot of credit for this, because she's the only politician in the state of Maine who's been speaking out about this. Like from day one, she was asking Jim Comey about it. She was asking, all of the head of the CIA under Biden, under Trump. From the very beginning, she's been pushing this, meeting with DEA officials. And I think it's unusual for an elected officials talking about something to actually spur some action. But I think that has happened in Maine as a direct result of Senator Collins' advocacy.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.